Let's talk color. There are actually two different types of color: additive colors and subtractive colors. Before we look at the two types of color, we need to look at what happens when light hits a surface. That light is called incident light, or incident to the surface. One, two, or three things can happen to that light, or some combination of these three things. The light can be reflected off the surface, that is, bouncing off of the surface. The light can be transmitted through the surface, or the light can be absorbed by the surface. This absorbed light can heat the material, and what happens depends on the material. For example, a mirror reflects almost all the light that strikes it, versus a black surface which reflects some of the light, or you wouldn't be able to see it, but mainly absorbs all the light. We'll come back to this concept throughout this unit. Back to color. Additive colors are how colors mix when you're painting with light. When does one paint with light? One paints with light with video, whether the old style CRT type TVs or the new flat type, or with computer monitors. The video picture is points made up of points called pixels. Each pixel is some combination of different levels of three colors: red, green, and blue, which correspond to the three types of cones in your eyes. If only red and blue are active, they mix and form magenta. If only, remember the magenta bird from our last lecture? If only red and green are active, they mix and form yellow. If only the green and blue are active, they mix and form cyan. Remember the cyan bird from our last lecture? All other colors are combinations of the three primaries: red, green, and blue. Cyan, yellow, and magenta are the additive color secondaries. If all of the three colors are active, they mix and form white. That's why they're called additive, because as they are added together, they form white, the color of light. This same process is also used with electronic billboards that you can see along the freeway. Those billboards are arrays of red, green, and blue LEDs, or light-emitting diodes, as shown in the picture on the right. Here's a short video demonstrating the process of adding colors.
Purple is a weird color. The formal name for purple is magenta. And the weird thing about magenta is that you won't ever see it in a rainbow. And the rainbow is supposed to be the full spectrum of colors. So why doesn't magenta appear in the rainbow? And the answer is to do with color mixing. I've always had a problem with color mixing because I know that you can't mix photons together. So you can't take a blue photon and a green photon and mix them together to get some other photon. That just doesn't happen. And yet you can mix paints together in art. Like, color mixing is definitely something you can do. So what's the answer? Well, actually, you can't mix colors together in physics. but you can do it in biology. It's to do with how your eyes work. For example, if I shine red light and green light into your eyes at the same time, if I cross these over, you will see yellow. So when you mix red and green together, you get yellow. And if you look at the spectrum, yellow is in between red and green. So maybe that's the rule for mixing colors together. You mix two colors together, you get the color in between on the color spectrum. And we can test that again. So I'll look at green and blue together. So if I mix green and blue together, I get cyan. And cyan is in between blue and green on the spectrum. So that's great. You mix two colors together, you get the color in between. But why? Why is that? Well, your eyes can't measure the wavelength of light directly. So it's not like a photon comes in and it's, 200 nanometers or whatever, and it detects that. Instead, you have these cone cells at the back of your eyes that are sensitive to different parts of the spectrum. So when red light comes into your eyes, there's a set of cones that fire and tell your brain you're looking at something red. So we'd call those the red cones. There's another set of cones that are more sensitive to green. So when there's green light going into your eyes, they fire and they send a message to your brain. And there's blue cones as well. So you've got red cones, green cones, and blue cones. So what about yellow? What about when you're looking at yellow light like that? Well, in that situation, you don't have a yellow cone. So what do? Well, yellow is quite close to red, so your red cone fires a bit. And yellow is quite close to green as well, so your green cone fires a bit. So your brain is getting a message from your red cone and your green cone at the same time. And it's deciding, okay, well, I must be looking at something in between those two colors then. And that's brilliant because your brain is perceiving something about the world that it isn't able to measure directly. It isn't directly sensitive to yellow light. It does mean that you can be tricked. And so if I make red light and green light going to your eyes, but no yellow light, you will see yellow anyway. So I've got a red torch and a green torch, and there's no yellow light here. But when I combine them, you will see yellow anyway. And TVs do this all the time. So if you look up close at a TV, you'll see the individual pixels, and there are red pixels, green pixels, and blue pixels. Those are the only colors being produced by your TV. And yet, they can produce all the other colors with this trick of color mixing. So what about purple? What about magenta? Well, what should your brain do if your red cone fires at one end of the spectrum and your blue cone fires at the other end of the spectrum, but your green cone doesn't fire? Does it do the same trick? Does it think, I must be looking at a color in between red and blue? Well, the color in between red and blue is green, and you're definitely not looking at something green because your green cone isn't firing. So in that situation, your brain invents a color. It makes up a color, and that color is magenta. And I can show you that. So with my red and blue torches, so when they combine together, there you see magenta. Absolutely beautiful. And that's why you don't see magenta in the spectrum. You don't see magenta in the rainbow because it doesn't have a wavelength. It's just the absence of green, if you like. Just to show you the full palette of colors that you can see on a TV screen. So you get red and blue mixed together makes magenta, green and red makes yellow, green and blue makes cyan. When you mix them all together, you get white. So when your red cone, your green cone, and your blue cone are firing together, you get white light.
Subtractive colors, on the other hand, are what happens when you mix paints, pigments, and inks. You probably did this in elementary school. You probably still do it if you paint or draw with colored pencils. The subtractive primaries are yellow, magenta, and cyan, or red, blue, and yellow is probably how you learned them in elementary school. Why are they called subtractive? Perhaps you can guess. Because as they combine together, they form black, which is the absence of light. If you have an inkjet printer, you might have noticed that the three colors of ink used are cyan, magenta, and yellow, the three subtractive primaries. The printer illustrated here also uses black as a separate color. This is for efficiency and to guarantee a nice, dark, even black. They could get black by combining the cyan, magenta, and yellow. Commercial printers also do the same thing. If you look closely at the color picture printed in a book or a magazine or a newspaper, it is made up of cyan, magenta, and yellow dots. This technique is called four-color process, or CMYK. The K stands for black. Because, again, black is added separately to assure that a nice, deep, even black is achieved. For your notes, here's a summary. Pause if you need to. Here's a summary of subtractive. Again, pause if you need to.